Welcome to Confessions of an Implementer, a podcast by Talent Harbor. We share unique stories of implementers and the companies they've transformed to give you a rare glimpse into the successes and the challenges of the system in action. I'm your host, Ryan Hogan. Let's jump in. Hey, joining me on the show today, we've got Richard Morris. And by all respects, Richard is the American dream from Great Britain. Richard came to the US, started in Silicon Valley, launched a startup or co-founded a startup that eventually went public. And we talked about the entire experience from starting it with 8 leaders as the founding team and growing that to over 1,000 people over a very short period in time, and the challenges that had on the organization and finding the right people and putting them in the right seats. We talked about what it was like to exit via an IPO, what Richard was doing at the time and how he celebrated with some KFC, and what he's doing today and how he found purpose and meaning post-exit, and some of the projects that he's working on today in the nonprofit space and giving back. So I had a great conversation. We talked about looking for sense and humor in candidates or prospective new teammates that are going to join a team or join the organization. And I hope you enjoy the show. One of the things that I did want to talk about today, you actually took a company public, and that's rare on a variety of reasons. One, it's just rare to meet somebody that's been a part of a team that's taken any company public. But two, you're the first person that's ever been on the show that has taken a company public. It's interesting, when I was raising money, whether it was Hunt a Killer or businesses before then, VCs would always ask, well, what's that moment? Like, how are we going to see the liquidity? And it's always like, well, we're going to ring the bell. And we never did, but you did. And so, like, how did you do it? What were you working on? And what was that process like?
Well, it's funny because I often, it almost seems unreal now, like a sort of fairy story, this sort of American dream. But I found myself working in California. I transferred out with another company, but I was actually working on some of the technology that was going to become broadband, and working with the team that was actually doing all of the regulatory work to unlock the broadband infrastructure. Once that was done in place with the FCC, then I jumped ship to co-found a business with the founding team. So there were 8 of us that went to co-found at the time Northpointe Communications. And so I found myself in this situation where I'd been asked to be part of a team. It was like the dream thing. There was a risk, of course, because it might not work out. And unlike some of the others, that would just mean having to go home to the UK and having to figure out somewhere to live because we were renting our house out. But on the scale of it, we were saying, what's the downside? Well, the upside is I get to be part of something amazing. And the downside is, we'll just have to exit and go back to the UK and live with parents for a while until we figure stuff out. So that made a lot of sense. And then it kind of went gangbusters, but I was very fortunate because the team that I was with was very experienced in all of the roles they were doing. So actually, it was a pretty full management team from the beginning. And to some degree, I feel like I was the youngest person along for the ride. And I was asked to lead a lot of the engineering, the program management, and the project management, which turned out to be, one of the many key elements that you needed to deploy. But in turn, you asked me the question about what was it like? Well, it was very strange because we'd been building up to this element, the float. The VCs in the float, in their infinite wisdom, had decided some of the people that had been founders, it was the right time to start exiting them out and putting known faces in. So there was some recruitment of some new people. And as it so happened, that really fit with my timescales, my wife's timescales to go back to the UK because we had our first child on the way. But it did seem strange because I didn't even get to meet my replacement for head of engineering before they came in. And it was all very a strange environment. But on the moment, on the day of the sort of float, and then it kind of went up to about 2.3 billion, I think it was just unreal. And I remember my wife said, what do you want to do? How do you want to celebrate? And it was so sort of an intention. Do you want to go out for a nice dinner? I said, do you know what? I just fancy getting, and I sort of, a bucket of Kentucky Fried Chicken and a bottle of champagne. And we just went back, and it was just And I still look back and say, I'm so pleased that we just did something stupid and like that. And it was just a great evening, the two of us, and thinking, right, okay, what next? But of course, when you're a founder, you have vesting periods and you also only have trading windows. So there was a sort of a time lock element, but it was just an incredible time. And I suppose I was just living that dream life, especially for some guy from the UK who, didn't even know what a stock option was before I'd gone to the US.
And is that, well, actually two questions. One is KFC in Britain, is it better than in the US?
Do you know what? I'm not sure, to be honest. I think the one difference is in certain parts of the US, you do get biscuits and gravy, which you don't get in the UK. We get some overcooked corn. And so, yeah, and the fries aren't that good. But, I don't know if I've done a detailed comparison, but it's pretty greasy either way.
Yes. I didn't know if that was like a thing. It's like everybody goes to KFC to celebrate in Britain. The only reason I asked it, I spent quite a bit of time in Europe about a year and a half ago, and the Burger Kings over in Europe were just amazing because they are not amazing in the US. And so I was wondering if that was a trade-off.
I suppose if we were going into fast food, I suppose Burger King, best burgers, but McDonald's has the best fries. I suppose there's those sorts of things really, but trying to avoid too much fast food these days.
That's good. When you guys started this journey, it sounds like you had started with a very experienced leadership team. Was that the vision? Like as you started to raise money, and I'm sure the questions came of like, what does the liquidity event look like in this enterprise? Was the vision at that point like, hey, we're going to grow this, and eventually there's going to be some sort of strategic that comes along and sees this as a perfect complementary? Or was the goal from day one like, we're going to take this thing public, and that was really kind of the marching order?
Well, I think I don't recall a specific exit plan because obviously it was early days. It was a race to deploy the services. I think when we looked at the leadership team that we had, it was very experienced because we needed legal and regulatory, we needed technology, we needed marketing, we needed operations. My skills really were very much on the fact that I could spell technology, but I could spell strategy and project management. And so my background was doing product development, which tended to be all of the functions in a business, the billing, the sort of marketing, the piece, just making sure they all tie together to get a product launch. So to some degree, I was kind of a bit like glueware, if you like, to make sure these things sort of happened. So fortunately, that was a skill that was needed and recognized. So I got in on the team. So I was very fortunate for that. But in terms of the leadership team, it was pretty solid throughout. And we added some, and we had financial leadership as well. So we had quite a lot of functions covered. And so we needed some extras, but actually that team stayed pretty solid for pretty much all the time, which is kind of rare in a lot of startups where you start up with a couple of people and then you have to grow. We were, as I say, 8 of us, but by the time I left, I think it was about 3-4 years later, we were about 1,000, somewhere between 1,000 and 1,200 people.
Wow. And when you guys first started, it was a founding team of about 8 people. Were you more hands-on? And as it grew to 1,000, did you really start to think about, what does it mean to become a leader and lead these people versus kind of the product or project management portion? Or did you stay hands-on for your entire tenure?
No, that's a good question. I said to my wife, look, I really want to do this role. And she, unlike a lot of British people who work overseas where there's an expat community, we weren't part of that kind of community. So she was saying, well, look, let's give it a year. So I already knew that my role might be limited by a year. Of course, inside, I hoped that she would be more comfortable and we'd be able to extend, which we did. But I did make it clear when I was taken on, if I have to choose between job and marriage wins. So that's just so that we're all clear on how we're playing the game. But essentially what that meant was very quickly I had to put people in place that would be able to cope and manage and step in when I'm gone. And so that was a really good leadership piece. The other thing, I was quite sort of young at the time. So when I say young, just probably about 28. And so I hadn't got as much wisdom. So I basically got a mentor who was one of the other co-founders who was much more experienced than me. But also I read a lot of wisdom literature, Stephen Covey, Dan Sullivan. So I ingested a lot of wisdom because I thought, well, I really need to make up for this. So I think a combination of ingesting wisdom from others as quickly as I could, and a lot of the sort of principle-centered leadership elements, as well as knowing that I need to hire better than me because I need to put in that piece so that my founding investment, if you like, and I say that my time and energy and also what I owed my colleagues was didn't rely on me. Because at some point I might be going back to the UK and I wasn't quite sure when. And that turned into a very fortunate strategy because I was able to hire some amazing people and be honest with them up front. I'm hiring you because you're better than me. You know, I can lead and do these things, but it just worked out very, very well with that sort of, I suppose, being open about it. And in the end, I stayed for about another 3 years.
When I think back to when I was 28, I had just launched, probably a seventh company, but my first company that actually had seen any sort of traction. And hiring to me at that point was, do I have a friend or somebody that I know that can take this work? Not necessarily like, am I hiring for experience? I'm just hiring to like offload some of the tasks or things that I was doing. And I was very bad at it. How often do you think you got hiring right in your younger days?
I was very fortunate. I think I got hiring right most of the time. Obviously, there were a couple of mistakes, and they always say people are your greatest asset, but it's not strictly true. It's the right people are your greatest asset. The wrong people become massive liabilities. But I was fortunate. I got most of the hiring right. And I think going back to one of the questions you sort of asked about the sort of growth element, I found that organizational development, the culture piece was really important to me, which doesn't usually get led out of engineering functions. But I felt we took a major lead on what kind of culture do we want? What kind of business do we want to have? And fortunately, the other founders are certainly the CEO, the main founder, if you like, the business, a guy called Michael Maliger, was very strong on that as well. And that really did help tie a lot of things together. So when things did get a little bit sticky, and, you know, they do in any business, we could come back to our sort of cultural norms. And that really played a lot for internal tension and keeping it down, as well as tension sometimes when things didn't work out with customers. So sometimes just things go to shit, right? But people will support you if you are true to your values and you're just being open and honest. And I think for some reason that seems to be rare, and it played to a lot of our strengths. So yeah, I loved the culture elements of it.
It's interesting when you talk about kind of having that culture cemented or defined, a good understanding around the organization before you go out and hire. When you look at a resume, you can tell if they have the experience. You can ask them a whole sorts of questions to understand, do you think that they're going to be successful in this role? Maybe you're looking for some sort of kind of outcomes-based performance, but it sounds like you also hired for culture. So, and maybe that was kind of the secret sauce at 28 years old, was like, I know who I'm looking for, or I know what I'm looking for, but who am I looking for? And that who, it sounds like, was defined by the values or the culture at the company.
And just the general attitude of a sort of can do, because in startups, I think especially in the ones that I've been in, your attitude to working with everyone and how you approach everything is more, you can teach skills, but attitude you can't really teach. And that was just an observational learning. And of course, later on when I did more leadership work, and that's some of the stuff that I do now, I've actually got some research and some words to put around that. But at that time, that still wasn't patently obvious, because some of the people you hire first early on that might be employee number 9 or 10, suddenly, you're 500 strong, and you've taken it with you, and some are going to find it easier to grow with the organization and some will struggle. And part of the management leadership is, can you still find them in the right place, even though their sort of general skills were great early on, but perhaps they're not as helpful in the realm of where you think they should be. You kind of take a little bit more time to find the right place for them. And I do recall some of those situations, but it was worth spending the time trying to find the right place for an individual because they've been loyal, they've been supportive. And for me, that loyalty, that connection, that trust is really important. And in fact, I felt it was a key part of building a great company, which then, of course, I went on to read other books that, of course, give you all the theory of that. But it was nice to be part of something that felt we could prove that.
Are there times where that didn't work? Because that gets back to kind of this notion of like right person, right seat. So if you've got the right person inside of the organization, they're embracing the values, they're everything that the company stands for and what you're trying to accomplish. And so to your point, like trying to find the right seat for them is important. And also while balancing resources. So not creating seats inside of the organization that are unnecessary.
Sure.
How many, like, were you successful with those types of transitions more so than not?
I can think of a couple, for examples. One was someone they'd grown and they were put into a role it really didn't work out. And I know that there were some people in another sort of division, if you like, felt that person should be let go. I felt uncomfortable with that, but I did so. In fact, they got sort of change function, which was a lower level, but it was kind of clear. So look, here's a function we really need you in. Please make it work, and they did. But that was an example. But in terms of times it didn't work, sure. One particular hire, and I'm going to be careful about what I how much I say because there were some legal ramifications, but which weren't particularly fun. But that was a hire where someone came in with very high credentials, capability, but I think after 3 to 6 months, someone's talking about the wins they had elsewhere, you kind of think that's great on the interview. What you really want them there by that time is talking about the wins they've had with you. And that wasn't kind of working. And that was a collective mistake, but ultimately I was a hiring manager, so it was my mistake. But I think with people, it's unpredictable. So you never know. You're rolling the dice at all times. You just try and make sure as best as possible you're rolling them in your favor. I just think you have to accept the fact it's not 100% gain.
And what are some things that you have done like throughout the interview process to try and suss out, like, is this person right for the culture? I'd love to come back to one of your examples as well, because I have a couple similar stories where when you look at the resume, you're like, this person's going to take us to the moon. They come through the door. And like what I had discovered is like, they were incredible at the other organizations, but those other organizations were different. They were either larger or, they hadn't scaled to our level, whatever the case is. Like we were not the right organization at the right size for them, and it didn't work. But that said, like when you're trying to improve your odds of getting the right person through the door, they have the experience. Are there things that you look for to try and suss out, like, are they going to be a fit inside of the culture that we have?
It's funny because I look back and I think now that I see how people hire and the amount of work people do to do the profiling, I think we would just feels like the Wild West. Do you know what I mean? So I sort of feel like you're asking me a question. I'm thinking, well, how professional were we? But it was really just having conversations, because I think, we can go into the stats of what someone is or the performance they've done and do all of that. But ultimately, if you're half decent at what you can do and you are going to fit. So really it's a bit of a judgment call in a conversation about what's important to that individual. And I think part of it as well is understanding, do they have that balance of really have a go-getting attitude, but not being so selfish they're going to be not a good fit in a team environment. And I think, fortunately, within my function, a lot of it was so I had some software engineers, but I had product management people and some marketing, because I had quite a range of different, and project managers. The technology people tend not to be too like that. It's just one of those things. They have other issues, but that's not for some of them. I think they don't have quite, not always, but not quite as much ego issues. So I think some of it is ego, and testing out how egocentric are you, how strong is your ego, in that if you can still have a strong sort of sense of purpose of wanting to achieve, but to achieve in a team environment. So we achieve together, that's going to work. It's sometimes it's just a little bit hard to tell. But in terms of that, I think there's a at one point there's a sort of gut feel after you've had a number of conversations, but I think you also get them to meet a number of the people they're going to work with, and you see how they interact with them, because, anyone can try and impress the boss. It's really, are they going to work well with their peers? I think the other thing is that really reinforcing culture from day one. So one of the things that we did in our teams, in my teams, was we had this thing at the end of our team meetings. We always had to nominate someone else in another team that had done a great job, and someone had to walk over or send them, because it might be in another building, a $5 Starbucks voucher, just as a, thanks for being amazing. But it was to try and make sure team meetings didn't end on a let's bitch and moan about somebody else. They ended on a high of who's done a great job. Let's go and let them know. And it was just trying to build trust across departments, because often with, high moving, what it's like. Someone's on a different floor, it's us and them, and you have to really work hard to we're just one team, so we don't need any of that rubbish.
Yeah, I agree. And the siloed nature, whether it's the technology team in marketing or product in marketing or sales and marketing and product, where you've got someone that's trying to create this thing, and then you've got sales and marketing out there kind of overselling the capabilities of that thing. There's just that constant friction. I love that.
Actually, on that point, Ryan, one of the funny things was we had sales engineers, and of course, sales engineers and the sort of back engineers, sales engineers often, because they understand a bit about where they can sell stuff that is slightly outside the boundary of standard product, they're dangerous because they can sell features and functions they know you can do, but you don't want to stand it. So what we did for a while is we put the sales engineers next to the core engineering team. So the point is, if you go and sell something that is going to be hard to maintain and deploy, you got to speak to these people because you're sitting right next to them. And that really worked well. That was quite funny.
I love that. I'm going to take that as a note right now, because that's going to be one of the intros in here is how to balance the team so that you don't get that kind of friction, because it's almost like a cross-pollination if you think about it. Like, they can speak both languages, and so going and overselling, you now have the other responsibility. We used to do this thing where people would nominate, and as a part of the nomination, they would have to give both the situation, and in addition to that, which core value it associated. Because I think a lot of companies out there, they've got a huge list of core values, or if they're on EOS, then they have 3 to 5, and they're great. But most companies, they just have this huge list of everything that they're about. But being able to take that and actually have some sort of tangible example in which, like, somebody did something great. Okay, that's great. They did something great. But what does that mean? It means that our core value number 3, it was in line with this, and this is how. I love the fact that you guys had reinforced it as well.
Well, it's funny because now that we know, and I work with core values and I do all this sort of stuff, of course I know that, but at that time it was I don't know if we'd gone to the point of defining core values, because we hadn't gone down that sort of some of those corporate things yet. But but it was sort of, now I can see what we were doing. But at the time, it was just, how do we make sure we build trust with across teams?
And are there other things now that you look back on with I'm convinced, by the way, that business is just all about right people, right seats. And so I realize there's frameworks and there's strategies and there's all these things that happen. But I believe firmly that if you have the right people in the right seats, a lot of these things will take care of themselves. Good leadership, reinforcement, clear vision, articulating where the enterprise is going. Are there things or experiences, whether it's that example or some of the things that you did hiring, that you now take to your clients that are struggling with the right person, right seat, and being like, you could tweak this, or you could do this, or I've done this in the past and it's either worked or it hasn't?
Well, it's funny. I do think one of the things I did find is that the people who really resonated with the humor of Monty Python tended to make good employees. Just because they just had got a sense of irony and had a good sense of humor. And I do think having a good sense of humor in stressful situations is really important. So I'm joking, but it's true. I think being able to have take things seriously, and immediately try and say, what's the right thing to do in this situation? Whether it's with clients, whether it's internally, not immediately covering up or stuff. What's the right thing to do? And then figuring out how can we do the right thing, or as close to it as possible. But in terms of hiring, it's so difficult. But I do think a sense of humor, but then that sounds very broad brush. But I think to fit in sometimes, there are certain characteristics that will be easier. But it depends on the function, doesn't it? Because, it all depends on what you want from the people. But I do think fitting in with and that culture ability to have some fun is really important. But it's very hard to interview for these things. You just have to have a series of conversations and speak to each other and say, do you think this person could fit in with us? Do you think they'd enjoy that? Do you think they get the most out of that? And would we get the most out of them? Because it's that two-way street. And so not relying on just your own personal judgment. I tend to be perhaps a bit more on the sort of the gut feel piece, but other people will be far more analytical. So I would want to surround myself with people who are very analytical, because I'll probably go on my own. I go on gut feel, but I'd never just take my own feeling on something. You've got to have a bunch of other people, because they see different things in people and they ask different questions.
And are there times, I love that you just brought up gut, because I think gut has gotten me in probably more trouble than anything. And the way that you just articulated that you've balanced that with surrounding yourself with people with analytics, so that you can balance like, hey, this is what my gut, this is the vibe, this is the feel, versus like, what are the analytics saying on that aspect. But is there a how do you tell let's say you're trying to make a decision? Because earlier we were talking about this notion of like, if you've got the right person, you can find the seat. And it sounds like there was somebody inside of the organization that had gone into a seat where you knew there had to be a change. Somebody wanted to make a different change, but you felt in your gut that was not the right change. Parting ways was not the right change, and there was somewhere else where that individual could go. Like, how do you know that was the right call? How do you know that wasn't your gut saying like, I believe, or like, I like this person, versus like, this person is best for the org?
No, I think sometimes in, say, a sort of startup high growth environment, you have a bunch of people sometimes that join at the beginning, and they're really good at doing all the bits and pieces you need, doing the crazy stuff that it doesn't fit into a standard job description. Then as you grow, you put them in a particular function, and sometimes that function grows underneath them, but they're unable to grow with it. And you have, and one of the things is, as a manager, as a leader, that's your responsibility, to watch that. And if that fails, that's you. Yes, the individual, it'd be great if the individual can spot that, but ultimately you're the one responsible for resource allocation. And so it was much my failure as not seeing that, as it was in some ways their failure of saying, do you know what, this job's got a lot bigger and I'm kind of struggling. Now I'm dropping the ball. So given that person had been with us for quite a while, I just felt that's cold. Now, obviously, if we tried something else and it didn't work, but people are real people, they're real individuals with real lives. And I think if they put their heart and soul into something and they have been there, and then one thing that really doesn't work out, and I realize it can have sort of major effects elsewhere, but I come back to that's a management, that's something as a leader, as a manager, you're responsible for that. And, I see that's something I really believe in that, part of your responsibility is to look after people. And of course, it also means you have higher trust, because if people see the fact that if they're a cultural fit and they'll do anything to support the team, and you then help them and support them in times that are stressful, your team know you've got their back. And so I suppose it's just, I think that it's like a compass. You sort of know what I think anyway, that the right thing to do is. People are not just expendable and disposable, but I still think that there are times where you've got to make the harsh decision because it's not working out. And it's actually better for them anyway, if you have to make a harsh decision, because there's a short period of pain, but then ultimately it's will they be happier somewhere else, and will we be happier if they're somewhere else, right? So it's kind of like, it's not necessarily the wrong people, they're the wrong people for you. So it's that sort of, we really want you to be brilliant, but perhaps brilliant somewhere else.
So you said you were 28. Was that when it started?
Yeah, I'm trying to do the maths right now. So about 96. So yeah, about 28, coming on 29.
And then when was the IPO?
That was in 99. So I would have been 30. It was about 3 years later, about 32.
32. So 32, and your life,
yes.
Your life has now changed completely.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. So I'm So yeah, came into a lot of finance, but lost a lot of hair. Fair deal.
Gotcha. Well, I thought you can do something with that.
You could. You could. Do you know what? It could. And actually, to be honest, I'm looking at you, and I just keep thinking hair envy. You know, you've got a sort of, what would you call it? A quiff to face ratio, which I don't.
A quiff to face.
So yeah. But yeah, you're right. I could have done, but I decided for whatever reason, I've got it here, and that's about it. But it's just a bit more highlighted than it used to be. But yeah, it was quite a transformational thing, and quite scary because I wasn't quite sure how to deal with all that. And but yeah, so I'm quite happy to talk about that. Have you know?
Yeah, like how did you? I mean, I think that's really interesting. 4 years at a startup that was incredibly successful. You go and the startup rings the bell. You had departed. You're back home, and like your life has now changed.
Well, it was a very interesting time because they had wanted to swap out the founders, and to put no names in. I decided to stay on because at the time they'd taken on PwC to do a massive coding of all the processes into an ERP system. And as I'd been there from the start, and I kind of get process, and that was one of the things that I was involved in, a lot of the sort of processes, of course, if we want to mispronounce that. So, but basically, I stayed on to help some of that work just voluntarily because I didn't have to, but I wanted the success of the business. But because we were leaving and moving back to the UK, and we timed it so that it was about just at the end of my wife's second trimester. Then it was another interesting thing is I had to leave the company, so I couldn't just stay on and do so. And in leaving the company, I had to decide what to do with my options, and because some of them that I could hold on to them and not sort of buy and sell. But the problem with that is I would have that tax liability, and I knew that, and I just didn't want that. And of course, that turned into a good time because I think it was late 1999 actually was the IPO. And then, so we had that 6 months. And so I actually bought and sold almost all of my shares because I was leaving the company. I just didn't want the liability. But of course, then we had the stock market crash 2000. So as it happens, I'd exited completely. So, if you look back, you think, wow, I must have seen stuff. I didn't. It was just a roll of the die. And I was very fortunate in that time. So I did come home to the UK with being a lot better off, obviously, than I could have wildly imagined. And so, yeah, it was I'd say it was an interesting time. So my wife and I decided that we'd give a fair bit away to some charities and to family. And then we would figure out what we wanted to do here in the UK. So I did go back into some work, which was interesting because then she asked me the question, said, why are you doing this? And I was going back into London, commuting, doing stuff and away from home quite a bit. And I got annoyed at that question because I really didn't have a good answer. I think the only answer I remember coming up with was because it's what I know how to do. And then I heard myself saying that. So actually, why am I doing this? I always wanted to be dad and a good husband. So I did change my sort of career at that point and decided to be at home more, be more dad, be more husband. And I just got a local job working in a small telecoms reseller so that I had something to do for 3 days a week that was vaguely tech related. But it was quite a tough transition mentally.
Because I've heard about this of like there's some sort of liquidity or exit event, and everybody on the outside is like that person's made it, and they've got it all figured out. And I've heard quite a bit on the other side of like depression and in search of purpose and going on this journey or this quest and trying to figure out or rediscover who they were. Kind of where were you in that spectrum?
Yeah, I did find it really tough. But you're also aware you can't go and moan and whinge to people and say, oh, I've really, because they're just like, what are you talking about? So, and it is a bit self-indulgent. But yeah, I did find it hard. I think the other thing, being completely honest, I found was, suddenly not having a big department and having teams and being known on the sort of, I suppose, in that industry and just picking up phone calls for people who who had problems with their mobiles, or you're trying to get them some SIM cards or something like that. Just felt, what am I doing? And then you think, no, I'm doing this because I want to be closer to home. I want to do some of these things. And actually, my kids they just see his dad, right? So I can take them swimming. I can do some stuff. And I can get in, and I did get involved in some local sort of volunteer work. So I think where I found it more difficult was if I went out for a few beers with some local, guys, some other dads and stuff, and everyone's talking about their work and they're doing this, and you realize that your label that you wear is such an important part of our cultures, rather than who are you, what do you do, especially for guys, to be honest, because it's very much, I was this or this and this, I've achieved this, and what do you drive, and so I did feel it a bit, and then I kind of went through the bit of spending a bit of money on some cars and doing all that stupid stuff, which I enjoyed. But now I feel like I'm semi-grown up, but I don't want to mature too quickly.
Did you find it difficult to relate to people at that point? Like, did you become kind of a chameleon and like, you had the same problems they had, or was it hard, like finding things that were kind of common once that switch flipped?
I found it really hard, especially because, bear in mind, I'd come back to the UK. So being around people who have gone through that is not like living in Silicon Valley, really isn't. So yeah, I did find it hard. It was, there's a great word. I felt discombobulated, just not the right person in the right place. But on the other hand, I look back and say, actually, do you know what? It was okay. It was, I did some volunteer work, which I really enjoyed, but it wasn't enough. And I thought, and something had come back to me, and I'd always said to my wife, if things go really well, I want to do some work with nonprofits and, make a difference, if you like. And I couldn't find anything that was really stimulating me. So I teamed up with some local people that we got talking, and we built a nonprofit. So in some ways, I couldn't find a job, so I created one. And I still work in that nonprofit today. And so in some ways, you could say selfishly I created that, but actually it just felt, going back to that purpose thing, I think it's quite important, where and how do you want to make a difference?
Yep. And let's talk about the nonprofit. Like what is it? What do you do? And what's it all about?
There's the logo. So, the Give Machine. So it was more of a sort of lifestyle nonprofit, but we've converted it into a full sort of charity. But it's there really to use some technology solutions to help smaller causes, community groups, if you like, community charities, schools, community groups, so on, to raise regular funds for their cause. Because a lot of the smaller organizations, they really struggle with fundraising. They struggle with just getting recurring income in. And so we wanted to have some solutions for them to help them do that. And it was really based on the fact of, when I was taking my children to primary school, I don't know, what would you call that? The first main school they go to. It could be, what's the one before that? Yeah, a combination of preschool and elementary. The bits where you get real PTAs that care, because when they get older, everyone's, I've had enough of that, I'm off, right? So, you know what I mean? Because the older guys just, and also kids don't want you there anyway, do they? So yeah, at that thing where you get PTAs type thing, and you realize that, the government doesn't fund that much. So they're always trying to raise funds to get new stuff. Well, these guys need help. I'm sure there's got to be a way to figure out some of our technical skills and what do we do? So we kind of built a nonprofit around trying to help put more money into community organizations. So it's taken a long time. We put, I'm just using some basic maths now, put about $3.5 million back into community organizations around the UK. But they can do a lot with small amounts. And that's the key is, can we just get lots of small amounts flowing into them? And sorry, go on.
Oh, I was going to say, is it the technology in which collects? Is it the marketing, or is it all of those things? Like it's
self-used tool sets. So for example, one of the main products we have at the moment, because I try and make sure I didn't want to be an infomercial for the charity, but okay, fair enough. Well, so one of the main products we have is we have a national lottery platform. So it's like a weekly draw. People can play from £1 a week. But what it does do is it allows the causes themselves to create their own lotteries on ours. So we have a master lottery that has 330 micro sort of lotteries on there. But the reason it's important is because big charities, big non-profits often have their sort of weekly lotteries, but we can give this to the small ones. There's no setup fee. There's no ongoing fees that we take a cut of the ticket sales, but they get a guaranteed cut of their ticket sales, and they can offer prizes to win up to £25,000 on a weekly basis and other cash prizes. So they kind of get some of the tool set that the big guys get to use. But just if they're a little local community organization, they can still raise that. And what's nice about the lottery, if you like, it's a weekly subscription or a monthly subscription. So it's regular funding. So for a lot of supporters, it's especially now that cash is a bit tighter, we can regularly support you, but there's also a chance we might win. So it's kind of like it's a two-way. There's something in it for us, there's something in it for them. And it works as a much lower barrier to sale, because if you think about a pure donation, that's great, but it's kind of one way. Not that that's a problem with that, but you've got to really love that non-profit to do that. Whereas this might be, well, do you know what? I'll buy a ticket for them and a ticket for them as well, and put it on recurring revenue. And I think that's why it sort of works really well. But the main other thing is that with smaller organizations that have very limited resources, it's easy to get it up and running. It's easy to promote. And most people know what one of these things is, and it sort of self-perpetuates. So it was just, how do we make their life easier?
I love that. And one of the reasons you are gracious enough to come and share your experiences and your story. And it sounds like this was kind of your path. Like as you were trying to understand your purpose and how you want to give back, you created this nonprofit. And so this is something that I definitely wanted to share with anybody that's listening. And so not only do you have this, but you also became an EOS implementer. Like how did that happen, or why did that happen?
Well, it happened for a couple of reasons. One is because I pay everyone else in a non-profit, but I missed the cardinal rule that you get when you're starting companies, and which is I didn't really pay myself. And because I thought that, and this is the journey of relationship to money. So I'd done quite well. We started the non-profit. I didn't really treat it as a business. I treated it as let's get as much money back into community. Then over time, started to learn actually that's a really crap way to run a business, right? Because a non-profit is still a business. So started to say, do you know what? I probably need to think like a grown-up properly rather than that separate. And so I sometimes look back on this non-profit on the Giving Machine thinking, I can't believe it's still here after all the mistakes we've made. So in some ways, it's a small business like any other. And for some reason, despite various mistakes, it's still here. It's still giving out money. It's not a huge thing but it is a thing, and it still gives out money every month. And I love it for that. But I was looking for something to say, actually, I would like to earn some more money so that I can sort of leave more as a legacy in many ways, whether it's to my family or to community or whatever. And I didn't just want to burn through what we had made previously, even though that's kind of looked after me for the last 24 years, just a bit of answer. So essentially, I was thinking, what can I do? But I want it to fit in with, and I've got to really believe in it, because you do get a bit. I don't know, what would you call it? Fussy, maybe, in terms of what the problem is that if you have done your own thing for a while, you make a really crap employee for someone else. So I knew that, I can do that. But I had so happened, I read Traction and thought, oh, I really like this. I'm a bit of a systemizer. So I thought, I'm going to put this into place in my own, charity. So I took it back to the group that I work with. I said, look, we're going to take some elements. We're going to do this. And I just happened to be at and I bought the book and gave it to some other people. Said, look, you've got to read this. I think you'll find this helpful for your business. And I just happened to meet another implementer, and they said, we got chatting, really lovely fella, and said, I think you really enjoy implementing. And I was like, I don't know, I might do, but organization development was always a thing. And then I thought, I just don't want to join another company. Surely it's not going to. And when I met people, I thought, are they taking this abundance mindset quite seriously? No, I'm not going to fall for it. And then I sort of, but when I met even more people, I thought, actually, do you know what? I think they really believe this stuff, and I believe it. Oh, what's happening to me? And it was interesting. Then there's a bit of amount you have to pay to get in, and because I'd been in the non-profity bit, which tends to be a bit more cash constrained, so I had a bit more of a limited mindset. And I remember saying to my dad, I said, not that I didn't have the funds, but I got into this, restricted type stuff. And I was like, I'm not sure. And my dad, at the time, I was caring for him, because he was in his sort of, if you call it last mile, if you like, but we were always very open and stuff. And he said, I'll give you the money. Just take it out of your estate and it goes, when I've kicked the bucket. So I said, okay then. So that we did. And yeah, it's just been great. And I see it as a form of social impact, building great companies where people love to work, where profit and the money you make is an outcome of doing the right things with the right people in the right way, and helping people understand how powerful that is to still make tons of money whatever, but actually seeing the power of people and aligning them and that cultural piece, is just amazing. And I really love it. As I say, it's a form of social impact, but it's got to be a good fit. I've got to be a good fit for the company and they've got to be a good fit for me. So I only do that about 50% of my time. And then the other 50% of my time, I do the sort of non-profit, the charity work. But the people I work with seem to quite like the fact that I do both. But I have to say it does have some challenges because there are some minimum requirements to maintain your EOS accreditation. So periodically you might get the odd reminder saying, and it's easier to hit those if you're doing it full time. Not quite as easy if you're doing it part time.
Yep. Do you find yourself gravitating towards like mission-based organizations more than you do like any, or are you just like, I put this out into the world and whoever comes, and if we're fit, we go from there?
Well, yeah, I think it's partly that, but it's also perhaps to help, and so far it's been successful, is that most organizations, most people, once they understand the power of motivation over and above pure money and try to explain to them, when you're trying to motivate people around you, they often want to build something bigger. They want to be rewarded financially, no doubt about that, but to be part of something, bigger. And so, and I've enjoyed seeing leadership teams embrace that. So fortunately, so far, the teams I've worked with have very much had more of a social element to them. But I do think sometimes I will say up front, look, if you see profit and revenue as an outcome of doing the right things with the right people in the right way, I'm probably going to be a good fit for you. But if you seem the primary objective in their own right, I might not be. So I am kind of, because I do think purpose-led and mission-led businesses, but that doesn't mean to say you're mission-led at the, what would I call, giving up on the sort of profit outcome. I think they coexist very well.
I loved what you just said there of people just want to be a part of something or part of something larger than themselves. And that's, when I think back on my entrepreneurial journey, it didn't matter really with any of the companies. It didn't matter if we were doing 100,000 a year, if we were doing 50 million a year, it always felt the same to me. It was never about the money. It's all about just bringing great people together and solving hard problems every day.
Well, it's a shared experience. And I think the human psyche is one that wants to belong. And in fact, one of the things that I was a trustee and vice chair of a nonprofit, a smaller sort of regional YMCA near where I live here. And one of the things I liked is their main sort of, I suppose, saying was to help young people belong, contribute, and thrive. And the young people that we were focused on there was tended to be people who needed quite significant support. So maybe they'd been kicked out of family homes, they got into trouble with the law. So it wasn't just a residential place with a gym. This was kind of a support hostel, if you like, that had people there all the time. And that belong, contribute, thrive, if you just take out the young people, doesn't that kind of generally define to have an ability to contribute and feel some sense of individual and collective thriving? It's a pretty base need. And so why would work be any different to that, which is kind of it's just like building communities. So I think if you can give that environment to the right people, they can achieve amazing things.
Love it. Richard, anybody that's been listening right now and they're like, I want Richard to be our EOS implementer, how would they get a hold of you?
Well, I suppose the easiest way, the quickest way is I have my own website at rjmorris.com. and has got ways to get in touch with me there, that would be amazing. But I would say, because I only do it half my time, it may be a bit tough, but I would say, and I'm not just being paid to say, is one of the reasons why I liked EOS is my fellow implementers. I just love them to bits. They are amazing. So, and I love the abundance mindset. We don't have any territorial bullshit, any of that. We help each other. It's nice to be. So for me, it's a nice place to belong, contribute, and thrive as well. And that's why they're kind of my tribe. I love them.
That's awesome. And last question: if you could have coffee, if you drink beer, if you could have a beer with any other EOS implementer, who would it be?
Oh, that's a tough one. Well, I suppose I wouldn't mind having a coffee or a beer with Gino. So, Gino Wickman, that would be cool. Well, funny enough, because I will be having, in fact, in 2 nights, because we've got our London quarterly. So I will be having a beer or probably a wine with quite a few other implementers that I get to see periodically from Europe. Picking one is going to be really tough. To be honest, it's funny because I hear their stories and I think, oh, I'm so lucky to be part of this. Brilliant.
Yeah. I agree. That was my whole thing, and especially starting this show was when we were interviewing EOS implementers for Hunt to Killer. I had probably about a dozen conversations, and the stories that I heard from EOS implementers, like it wasn't a consultant, it wasn't someone just trying to make a buck. It was people that had real experiences, real leadership, real exits. It was operators just looking to give back, contribute, and help other people solve their problems. So I 100% agree with you there.
Well, and I think one of the things I do like about the selection process, and I kind of in my own language, is you're probably not going to get someone who's just swallowed a folder and is going to regurgitate it at you. You can get someone who can really help. And so I say I'm very fortunate. I think I'll say lucky, but we know you make your own. I say you make your own luck, but if you put out good stuff, for some reason the good stuff tends to find you too. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
There it is. Awesome. Richard, thank you so much for coming on. I appreciate it. I've got a whole page full of notes now. It will not be hard to create the intro for this, but thank you so much for taking the time to join.
Yeah, no, it's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Confessions of an Implementer is brought to you by Talent Harbor. To find out more about Talent Harbor and our fractional services and talent search solutions for businesses, visit talentharbor.com. And then make sure to search for Confessions of an Implementer in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts, or anywhere else podcasts are found. Make sure to click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. And on behalf of the team here at Talent Harbor, thanks for listening.